Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Well, welcome to episode 56 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is AJ Matthew, and join me as always, my partner in ministry, Scott Ball. And
Hello.
Today we are going to talk with another good friend of ours, Dale Sellers from the 95 Network and author of the new book, Stalled. And this is a great read. I think you're going to find it really intriguing, especially if you've been in ministry for any period of time and have felt like, as Dale's subtitle is, that you'd be there by now, but you're not. And it's such a deep topic. And there's so many facets to it, Scott, as well. And it's things that we talk about all the time here on the podcast and in the work that we do with churches. But Dale is driving right into the heart of every pastor who really just may feel like he's not where he thought he would be.
Yeah, I mean, this is a podcast about your story, right? A lot of the things that we deal with in this podcast usually are just highly practical, pragmatic. Do A, B, C, and get results X, Y, Z, right? And there's still a lot of this in the conversation that we have with Dale. There's a lot of really practical nuggets that you can take, but I think it's really important to talk about our story, right? And understand how that sort of our personal narrative and our own individual journey in ministry impacts the practical realities of our churches and our leadership and what we see happening. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed having this conversation with Dale and AJ, and we can't wait for you guys to listen in on it. Here, let's get straight to it.
Let's welcome Dale.
Dale, we're so glad to have you on the podcast. Welcome. Glad you're here.
Man, I love being with you guys. Y'all know that. Some of my finest memories in life were coming to Texas and eating fajitas with you guys.
Oh, man.
AJ knew I was going to bring it up. This is the best fajitas I've ever had.
I can count on you to bring up the fajitas anytime, Dale.
They see everything you have. If you follow what I do, everything's marked by a place that I ate.
I got to tell you, Dale, here's a little secret. If you ever are on American and you have to have a layover in Dallas, just know that you can hop into Pappasito's at the airport,
right?
And
that may change my airline.
Yeah, it's almost as good as when you're at the main restaurant.
Oh, I am so thankful you told me that.
Yeah,
I'm making notes right now.
Listen, for our podcast listeners, this is just so you know. Here's another airport DFW airport hack for you. If you go to Pappasito's in the airport, order the tacos al carbone, like. Order or carne asada or whatever, like they order the steak fajita tacos versus ordering the actual beef fajitas. You'll pay like a third of the price and you'll get two of them, but it's enough meat that you can spread it out into three, and it's the perfect size meal. Comes with rice. It's not on the menu, Dale. It's not on the menu. You have to.
That's quite a hack.
This is a reason why you need to listen to this podcast, right?
That's
there,
right.
Welcome to the Airport Culinary Podcast. Thanks for joining us on episode 1.
Oh, good grief. Well, you know what? Sorry. Okay, we have talked about food now. We're here to talk to Dale about his book Stalled and helping pastors move forward in their ministry when things aren't working out the way that they thought they would when they entered the ministry. So your book's called Stalled, which I love that. Because I believe that every pastor starts out their ministry with a vision for where they'd like to go, but so many of us really begin to stall out somewhere along the way. And I like the word stall because stalled invokes a pause, not a failure. It's not like you've totally bailed on ministry. It's just a stall, right? So tell me a little bit about why you chose the word stalled for the title of the book. What was sort of your journey for choosing that word?
Well, the book itself is my whole journey. So, I've been in ministry now for almost 40 years. And to be very honest with you, I thought all along we were going to call the book, I Thought I'd Be There by Now. So I wrote it with that in mind. And then we get toward the end of the writing process, and the publisher lets me know, hey, we need like a 1 or 2 word title. So that kind of threw me for a loop a little bit because I've got this long title. And so we just sat down and thought about it. And, In the opening of the book, I tell a story about how I was on a large forklift that I shouldn't have been on. It has a big, long boom arm that goes out. So I was trying to move a stack of bricks and wasn't paying any attention as I was trying to move that stack of bricks that I actually was burying the forklift. And I got it so stalled out that it was literally sitting on its belly. And all four tires, and the tires were big, as tall as I was. I'm 6 foot tall. They were all just spinning. And I thought, man, if there's anything in the world that describes where I was in ministry, it was that example. And so it just seemed like a natural fit to explain because, you know, I was doing something I wasn't trained to do. I had no idea how to do it. And then I really didn't need to be doing it, that specific thing. And I think a lot of our pastors are there. I think a lot of our pastors are being called upon to, they're trying to make withdrawals. Our church is trying to make withdrawals from us in areas where we haven't had any deposits. You know, our pastors can preach well, they can pray well, they know how to do the basics of ministry, but they haven't been taught how to lead and strategize and organize, which is kind of what, you know, what you do as well as what we do at 95 Network. And so I just felt like that was a really good way of describing how I arrived at this point in my life.
What do you think is the biggest sort of sucker punch when you get in ministry and you realize, oh, I didn't realize I have to do that? You know what I mean? Like, I think they get into ministry, you know, you got to preach on Sundays, and you know you're probably gonna have to do some funerals and some weddings, and maybe even leadership to some degree. But what do you feel like is the thing that most pastors, when they get into ministry, they don't realize that this thing is coming?
If you're talking specifically like when you're young and you enter ministry, I was, and I think we all are, we enter ministry with a very naive optimism that we're going to change the world. And for me personally, I think the biggest sucker punch was to recognize that there were leaders in our church who had no desire to do that. Their desire was to maintain what they've always done, keep doing what they've always done. And they saw me more as a hireling instead of as a leader. And I mean, that by far was the most shocking thing to me. The first 10 years that I was in ministry, my wife and I, Gina, we traveled on the road with a Christian music group. So we were in thousands of churches, and we saw what so many pastors were dealing with. And without exception, I think this is the number one thing that defeated them was because they ran into board members that felt like they owned the church. Or, I actually attended a church at one point in my life where one of the lead board members, the church was founded in his home. So he felt like it was his church. And I think without a doubt, that's the biggest sucker punch of all, is to recognize there are people that are in church that really aren't interested in advancing the gospel. That's very hard to deal with. Yeah.
They wanted to be preachers. They realized very quickly they had to become politicians.
Oh my goodness. Oh yes.
Yeah. It's a lot like parenting, right? You never really know what you're getting into until you're in it. So.
And then when you're in it, you don't know what you're into.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And I think that there's two responses to that, right? One is to sort of throw your hands up and go, I didn't sign up for this. And then the other hand, it's to learn how to be effective in the room where it happens. Really lean into it. And not that you want to become a political being and make it about the politics, but how do you navigate that? There is no way, I don't think, as a pastor, to make it long-term unless you learn how to navigate those moments well and to learn how to steer a room. I mean, you have to learn that.
John Maxwell said, before you ask for a hand, you have to touch a heart. And he shared the thing I used to love. I loved a lot about John when I learned about his ministry and his teaching in the 80s and the 90s. He was very transparent about some mistakes he made, but he shared how when he went to his first church, he recognized very quickly that there was a gentleman there who was the leader of the church. John wasn't the leader. So instead of opposing that and fighting with that guy, he actually went and built a relationship with him. And he learned how to do what leadership is all about. He learned how to lead through others. And I hate that you use the word, and we have to use this word, but it's not politicking to learn how to lead through others. In fact, our calling, if you really want to get down to it, is to equip others anyway. So if you already have someone who's the leader of the church, well, then equip that person to be a great leader.
Sure.
But you will not be successful in ministry if you do not learn how to build relationships. And he also shared in his second church how he had a fellow there who opposed him openly. And then they finally had to go to a place and sit down and had to come to Jesus' meeting and say, listen, I want to build the kingdom. I really don't want to fight you the whole time. So, and again, all of those are leadership principles that we're not taught. You know,
Right.
nobody likes conflict. No, if you enjoy conflict, man, if you enjoy, getting in conflict with people, you need therapy. Nobody enjoys that, but you have to do that. It's part of what we do. There is conflict, and there are times when you just have to call people out. And if we can just hang here for a second, the other thing I think that really hurts us here is so many of our pastors are tied to their churches because they can't do anything else. So they're financially tied to it
Sure.
in such a way that they can't really lead well because they have to. This is where politicking comes in. But they have to acquiesce to the leaders because they'll lose their job and they'll lose their income. And
Right.
there's no way to lead a church effectively when that's over your head.
Right. Oh, that's such a good point. Yeah. When I was in school, I got my degree in youth ministry, and one of the things that the professor who was in charge of youth ministry was advocating for, I did not take up the advice at the time, but something he was advocating for was that every youth ministry major would be required to double major in something else, so that
Outside of ministry?
outside of ministry.
I
Right.
wish more pastors had listened to that. I grew up building houses. I got my builder's license when I was 18, and I have fallen back on that many times. And it allows you to lead well, not be arrogant, not be, I'm not talking about being obnoxious, but
Sure.
you can't lead if you know that if you oppose the challenges that are there in your congregation, you're going to lose your job if you don't know how to do anything else.
Yeah.
Well, and there'd be a net benefit for pastors if they got their their bachelor's degree in business, because they'd learned some key principles that would help them leading a church. Anyway, so if they had that,
we could hang there all day, but that's not the podcast today.
right, or marketing, or communications,
Yes.
or like there's any number of things that they could.
Yes. Oh, you're
get
just trying to
education
turn the
for.
church into business now. I know what you're doing.
All right, let's move on. Early in the book, you mentioned how destructive the comparison can be, comparing yourself to others. But I was curious as I was reading that, are there any types of comparison that you feel like are actually healthy? And I guess sidebar to that, how can you shut down that need to compare yourself to others? Because what you don't want to become is apathetic, where you go,
Yes.
well, I don't care what other people are doing, So I think there's a question in there, but are there types of comparison that are actually healthy for us, or is it always unhealthy and always destructive? And how do we shut down that without becoming apathetic and not caring at all, which is also destructive?
No one's asked me that question before, so I had to think it through a little bit. But you know what? The truth is, yes, there are some comparisons that are healthy, and that is why we go to conferences. I mean, at the ground level, that's why we attend a conference, is we can observe like tactics that other ministries are doing that are updated that we can learn from.
Mm-hmm.
The danger happens, though, when we go and attempt to copy what they're doing and try to go back and implement it at our church. One of the big dangers, I think, that happened for many small churches was they'd go to the large church conference and they would see all the lights and the sound and the haze, which some churches call smoke, and the bands and all that stuff, and they realized this is working, it's reaching the next generation, and they immediately want to come back and implement that stuff. And so I always tell everybody that the danger in going to a conference is one of two things. Either one, you walk out and go, oh, we could never do that, and you're so discouraged and defeated, or worse, you go back and try to do that. And the problem is you've got to, you have a unique calling. What we teach when we do our one-day conference and when we work with churches is every church has a mission, and we believe your mission's why you exist. And the majority of the churches in America have no idea why they exist, what they're trying to accomplish every week. A lot of them that have been just dealing with COVID have been just kicking and screaming to get back to doing what they've always done because they really don't know what their mission is. Mm-hmm. So you can go and learn from others certain methods, if you will, of how to implement change in your church. It may motivate your people. It may give you some ideas. You may learn some cutting edge things that you can do. And so that part of comparison, I think, could work. But the bottom line is this: if you don't know why you exist, you will become apathetic. Mm-hmm. You will continue to do what you've always done. You won't want to rock the boat. And honestly, you know what? I wouldn't rock the boat either if I had no mission. What is the purpose? I don't believe in rocking the boat just to cause change for the sake of change. You need to know why you're changing. And if you don't know that, then you will tend to be apathetic and tend to just kind of stay the way you are. So that was a great question, because I had really hadn't thought about it, because comparison really hurt me, because I was comparing myself as a small church pastor to all my large church pastor friends and thinking something was wrong with me because I wasn't accomplishing what they were accomplishing. But the truth was, I wasn't really sure what I was trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I think, the healthier comparison would be first, if you are going to take advice or attempt to compare, make sure that example that you're looking at would share, a Great Commission mission. So, if somebody's mission is to make and mature disciples of Jesus, then you're at least on the right track. But more so to compare and maybe attempt to adopt that ministry philosophy, not necessarily the strategies in which they do it, but the heart and the purpose in which they're trying to do it.
And that's why I think that your question was so cool, is because I think there is some comparison. When you look at other ministries that are successful, you can learn some things, you can glean some things from them, but if you try to mimic them, it's going to blow up in your face.
Yeah, that never works, right?
Yeah.
Something we've talked about at length here, AJ, on our podcast is emotional intelligence. I know Aubrey wrote a book on the topic, and it's something that we've been hot on, emotional intelligence, or EQ, and the significant role that it plays in becoming a high impact leader. In fact, I don't know that you can become a really effective leader unless you have a high EQ, high emotional intelligence. And you kind of hint at this, I think, in the book when you talk about blind spots and how they can lead to being blindsided by leadership challenges. And so how can pastors, in your opinion, how do you feel like pastors can boost their emotional intelligence, become more self-aware, and try to avoid developing those blind spots in the first place? I know you can't see your blind spots, otherwise they're not blind spots. Right?
I think, again, I love the questions you've asked today. They've been so probing. And the first thing I would say is I don't think you can avoid developing your blind spots unless you start out understanding that you're going to have them in your teens. I just think it's part of being human. It's part of being a leader. It's part of being a man. And if you're a man, women, I think, are more intuitive, but guys, we are not as transparent. We don't share our emotions. And so I think,
speak for yourself, Dale. I'm about to start crying.
Okay. I'm not even going to go there.
Our regular listeners know that, Scott.
AJ, could you hand him a tissue, please? Thank you so much. What a great group. So I don't know that it's possible to avoid it, because I think the scriptures speak too much about, pride goes before a fall and haughtiness before destruction. I just think that is part of life, that you need to know yourself. And so, but here's the thing that I know to be true. You're never going to avoid or clean up blind spots unless you have the input of other leaders in your life. And I want to hang here for just a second. When Promise Keepers came along, one of the things they really pushed was guys getting in accountability groups. Get yourself with some people and share your junk and bare your soul. Let me just tell you how I'm wired. I'm not telling you anything about me on a deep level if I don't know you love me. I think that's the missing ingredient to some of the accountability things, because I know lots of guys who've been in accountability groups who still, their life fell apart because they were hiding something. So being part of a group that doesn't reveal the truth and you didn't share what's going on in you won't work. So the thing you've got to find, and this is hard for us as leaders, you've got to surround yourself with some people that are leading at a higher level than you, that love you. If you don't have people that you can be transparent with and that you can be honest with, that love you, that really want the best for you, then it's always going to turn south on you. I remember being part of denominational groups or pastors groups, and how everybody's always walking in like a big fluffy peacock, showing off and comparing notes. But when it came time to get transparent, everybody shuts down because they don't want to be exposed, because so many pastors feel like they're stalled. They're embarrassed at where they are. And for me, as you guys read in the book, I felt like Jesus was mad at me. So, if I feel like Jesus is mad at me, I'm certainly not going to tell something human. And so I think there's some danger that comes when you say you're part of an accountability group if you really aren't being honest.
Yeah.
I don't think that helps you in the long run. And so,
yeah.
But you're also fooling yourself if you think you're going to go through this life and not have blind spots.
I feel like if you get hit hard enough, like I've been through my own junk, right? Anybody that really knows me well knows that. And I have found that there's if you get hit hard enough and you're sort of forced to become vulnerable, and you learn the value of being vulnerable, it gets easier to be vulnerable even with people that you don't know particularly well, because you see the reciprocation and the trust that builds. Like I've found that in my ministry with the Malfers Group and what we do in helping churches, that I don't get really anywhere by bloviating and puffing my chest and trying to go, well, look at all the things I've done.
That was a huge word. I love that.
We'll put the definition in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes. But by not only sharing successes, but by sharing failures, things I did wrong, things that could have been better, or, you gain so much more credibility, I think, than beating your chest.
Right. Without exception, the number one comment I have had about this book is overarching. Number two, so far away. Number one comment has been, we can't believe your transparency.
Yeah.
Because I shared my junk. I shared the fact that I felt like a failure. And so many people, either ministry or not ministry, are going, this is so refreshing because people don't do it. And why do we not do it? Because we feel like failures, or we feel like we've let Jesus down, or we feel like we're going to lose our job. And so while this is necessary, I think it would bring great healing, and it would bring great relief. And yes, maybe it would eliminate our blind spots, as we can, just in this conversation over the last 5 minutes. It ain't easy.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
I think it's kind of like a muscle that you've got to begin to develop. You've got to, once you kind of maybe break through, learn some techniques, or have somebody be able to draw that out of you.
Oh, what a great
you can begin to exercise that vulnerability muscle then.
Yeah. I think that if for any pastor or leader who's listening, the deception is that hiding things, burying things is avoids pain long term.
It causes longer.
But it causes long term. Yes. Vulnerability is hard for a second. It's hard to get the sentence out, but the relief on the other side of that is immense and long lasting. So it's hard. It's not natural. But and again, you don't want to overshare for sure.
Think about this too. In so many, especially you guys work in this space, small churches, if you share anything like that, they will bury you alive. Again, we could hang here all day.
We've hung here too long, but I've experienced that. I personally experienced that immensely. Opened up about something to somebody I probably shouldn't have. Bit me. It was a disastrous ending. But on the other side of that, though, Dale,
was it hard for you after that to be honest again, though?
No.
Okay, it's just the way you're wired then.
I think the reason is, though, because I discovered through all that process, Dale, that I was not in a place. You shouldn't be in a place that doesn't care about you.
Absolutely.
So it was really difficult, life-changing, depression-inducing for me to leave that situation. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. I wouldn't be where I'm at now, emotionally or anything, if I hadn't gone through that. And I don't know. And I'm a much more vulnerable person now since then. And I realized that the reason why that thing fell apart is I wasn't open earlier. Sure. You build up the facade of everything's okay. Sure. And then when everyone finds out, well, not everything is okay, then you've created disappointment.
We could have done the whole podcast around this, and because this is a huge issue. So the end of the day is, the only way to avoid blind spots is to be honest about them, and you're not going to do that if you don't have people that love you.
Yeah. I want to jump to kind of another point that I think this is actually kind of where we can find some relation here. So we're talking blind spots, and Dale, near the end of the book, you introduce an unknown sweet spot. Mm-hmm. And I was kind of taking that as kind of vision language, because I feel like there's a lot of times we're operating in a sphere, but there may be another sphere, you draw it as a circle, that maybe is outside of what we're perceiving or discerning. And so I wanted you to speak to that, about how pastors, because we're talking about, tapping into things now that are healthy. So how can pastors begin to tap into this unknown sweet spot in ministry that God's got for them out there?
Well, let me tell you how I learned this whole scenario. And that chapter 9 in the book is built around a conversation that happened with a friend of mine named Brad Cooper. And I had Brad come in I had taken this church staff that I was working with offsite and to do a vision retreat. And I brought Brad in just to give a devotion. And it was really cool because as he walked in that morning, he said, I had prepared to share something, but as I walked in today, the Holy Spirit put some, and whenever I hear someone say that, my antennas go up. Okay, man, he's got a word for me. I'm going to learn something. And so Brad walks in, he draws a big circle on the board, and he talks about that being your sweet spot. And he puts all these different things in there, that about effectiveness and all this kind of stuff. He says, but what you don't recognize is, and then he goes way over in the top right-hand corner of this big board, draws another circle and calls it the unknown sweet spot. He says, what you don't recognize is that while you're being faithful and content and happy and joyful and where you are, that sweet spot you're there is creating the unknown sweet spot. Well, I didn't want to hear that. Because for the first time in my life, I was working as a consultant for the Unstuck group. I'm an executive pastor at a church, and I finally got to this place in my life where I'm part of a great team. The church is doing well, Unstuck's doing well, and I just didn't want to go anywhere else. And I knew when he walked in that day, he was talking to me. And about 2 weeks later, the opportunity presented itself to become the executive director of 95 Network. And I didn't do it. That was in February. I didn't take over at 95 Network or become executive director till July. Because I was happy and contented where I was. But I do say this in the book, if you stay in your sweet spot too long, it can become your sour spot because you get comfortable there. And so here's what if you want to understand what could happen for you in the unknown sweet spot, the way to get there, I've got 4 things that I think will help you. The first one is you got to be honest about your gifts. What you're good at, what you're gifted at, how did God make you? So many of our pastors feel like because they felt called into ministry, they're supposed to pastor a local church. And if you don't have that gift of pastor, then you're going to frustrate the people and you're going to be frustrated and you're going to be constantly moving around. You can be called to ministry and not necessarily have to be the local church pastor. That is a specific calling. I think the second thing you have to answer is what brings you joy. Now, guys, when I was a kid growing up, I would not commit to going to full-time ministry because I thought I had to do something I hated. That's just the way it was back then. It was like, well, if you really feel like God's called you to ministry, then you have to go be a missionary somewhere that you don't want to go to. And I'll never will forget when I was 18 years old, when like the Holy Spirit made me aware that God did not want me to be a missionary because I would be terrible at that. He didn't want me to do that. It wasn't what I was created to do. So what brings you joy? I was doing a podcast a couple of weeks ago, and the guy asked me this question. He said, what's your dream job? I said, what I'm doing. He goes, yeah, but if you could do anything else in the world, what would you do? I go, what I'm doing. I go, I'm loving what I'm doing, So very few people are there. The third thing is you have to evaluate where you see ministry success, which that kind of ties into number 1 about your gifts. Where are you seeing success in ministry? If you're seeing success in ministry, in street ministry, then maybe you need to be working in something that's more focused on street ministry. If you're seeing success in ministry and reaching young people, maybe you need to be focused more in that arena of life. Where do you find that's easy for you to have success? And then I think this is the most important question of all to answer about your unknown sweet spot. You've got to determine what is where you're helpful and your gift set and expanding God's kingdom. We haven't been called to satisfy the saints. We've been called to save the sinners. Now, yes, we want to encourage believers and let them get edified. But if your entire life is spent around just satisfying saints, you're never going to know your unknown sweet spot because you'll settle there. And so that's kind of what this whole thing's about. It's not settling just because the money's good or there's security there. I guess the thing you need to answer for yourself is this. If you could do anything else, what would you do? And for me, I would do what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I can think of 2 pastors right now. One of them is on our team who they kind of know they know what their sweet spot is, and that's the sphere in which they want to operate. And another guy I know that really had a calling out of a long career in secular business into becoming a pastor, but not at all a preaching senior pastor. And he's working now in like his sweet spot, and he's doing amazing at it. So
you guys see this like we see it. Probably the greatest need in the local church today is the role of executive pastor. Yeah, where you're not necessarily the communicator, the preacher. Not that saying you can't do that, but most pastors, people who are wired to pastor, who care for people, some of them are good communicators, but they love people, but they're not good at the administrative stuff.
Yeah.
And the administrative side is what's killing so many churches.
I love the executive pastor role. For any church that has the luxury of being able to have it in whatever capacity they can,
Yes.
It's a lifesaver for a lot of pastors to have that right-hand person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and depending on the church too, we kind of make the assumption that, if you're a solo pastor, your second hire should be the music guy or the youth ministry guy or the children's person. I'm not saying it shouldn't be those things and it should be an XP, but maybe your number two person or your number two hire ought to be someone who's more administratively gifted, who can maybe wear a couple of hats temporarily. This is what we did in the church plant that I was involved in. I was the number two guy who took on more of that administrative role. Mm-hmm. I also led worship for a season. As soon as I could take that hat off, I did, because I didn't really have a passion for that.
Well, this kind of goes back to your blind spot. If you realize, okay, here's what I'm really gifted at. This is what I'm good at. Mm-hmm. What I'm not good at is maybe implementing things. Maybe you're very good at vision and creating ideas, but you're not good at follow through. And in your case, you would be better off bringing on as a staff member or volunteer first someone who can help follow through even before a music or youth person, because everything's going to fall apart anyway. So you need to make sure you staff where you're weak.
Yeah,
and again,
that's exactly right. Because then you end up being able to make those other hires faster.
Yes.
Counterintuitively.
Yep.
Yeah.
Our church was just talking this Sunday about sending, how Jesus sent out the disciples in pairs. There's layers to the value of that. And just one of them could be this right here, having strengths and weaknesses that each other makes up for.
Probably the reason most pastors feel stalled is because they think they've been called to be Superman or Superwoman, and they haven't. You're not, again, you got to become an equiper. You're not called to do this alone. You're not called to do this on your own. And if you continue down this road, you will be sitting just like I was, spinning your tires.
There was a book that came out a number of years ago. I don't want to say what it was or who it was by, but I just don't want to call anybody out.
You would never do that.
I especially wouldn't in this instance. But on the cover of the book was a man standing in a wheat field, with a Bible in one hand and like a Bible in my hand, like not a Grim Reaper thing, like a scythe. What is it called?
Sickle?
Sickle? Whatever.
Sickle?
Yeah. Like this, but the image was really compelling. It was this, and it was about planting churches, and it was this idea like this is the image, right? Exactly what you're talking about. Not a superhero in a Superman costume, but of a pastor in a wheat field with a Bible in one hand and a sickle in another, right?
Ready to read.
I'm
Grim Reaper pastor.
Grim Reaper. Yeah. But I always felt like this is the most damaging image ever, because that is not a biblical view of what ministry was ever supposed to look like. And no pastor should ever view himself or herself through that lens.
But they probably do.
And so
that would be the picture for Jesus. I mean, Jesus could stand in that place. The rest of us can't.
Yeah. But even he chose not to.
Yeah, he chose a bunch of knotheads. I mean, that's what he did. So it's like, I tell our churches all the time, it's crazy. It seems like we think that our churches we're just gonna find leaders everywhere. Mm-hmm. Well, diamonds and gold come to you with dirt on them. You have to mine the diamonds. You got to mine the gold. Our jobs as pastors is help get the dirt off so these people can flourish. Leaders don't come to you ready made. We have to equip them.
That's right. That this is exactly Jesus's prayer, right? We say, he says, pray to the Lord of the harvest that he would send laborers into the harvest. We make that verse about the harvest. It wasn't about the harvest, it's about the laborers.
Absolutely.
He's saying the harvest takes care of itself. You work on the laborers. And laborers are leaders. And so if you want to have a harvest, you have to find the laborers.
And if you are stalled out, then don't blame yourself and don't feel isolated, because that's where so many of us are. But you don't need to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What a great way to wrap that up. Dale, tell folks, how can they find you and find your book?
Well, if they want to contact me, as I said earlier, if what we were saying today really hits you in your heart and you need to talk to someone, please reach out to Scott or AJ at Malfers, or reach out to me at 95 Network. It's the numbers 9 and 5, 95network.org, and you can find me there. And then if you want to get a copy of Stalled, you just go to Amazon and put my name, Dale Sellers, and just put the word Stalled, and it'll pop up, and you can order it through Amazon. And that way you get free shipping.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
That's
and
good.
it's a good read, and I think there's a lot of pastors out there that need to hear that message, because I know they can relate. So thanks for pouring your heart into it, Dale. Thanks for writing it and making it available.
Thank
And
you
we
guys for the
appreciate your
opportunity.
we appreciate your ministry.
Thank you for the opportunity to tell people about it. We just, at the end of the day, we just want to help pastors.
Amen.
Amen. Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us, Dale.
Yes, sir. You guys have a great day.
Man, really appreciated that conversation with Dale.
Yeah.
And I think I could go back and forth with him on some of those topics for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just really appreciated what he had to say. And I think something that a lot of pastors can relate to. I don't know that I've ever met a pastor, AJ, maybe ones who just got into ministry, but most pastors have some sort of wound, some sort of story.
Mm-hmm.
And we often carry those with us silently. And so I appreciate Dale's willingness to kind of push that into the light and expose those wounds so that they can drive us towards healing and more effective ministry.
Yeah, absolutely. The honeymoon is over quickly for a lot of pastors out there, but at some point it does end. And yeah, I think it's a book for them for sure.
Well, thank you guys so much for tuning in to Church Revitalization Podcast, episode 56, talking about the book Stalled, talking with Dale Sellers. You can get the show notes for today at malfersgroup.com/56. That's malfersgroup.com/56. We will talk to you next week. See you next time.